Hola, it's Joe Pardavila. You're listening to the Forbes Books podcast, and say what you will about Elon Musk, but he gambled away the fortune he made from PayPal to build game-changing companies SpaceX and Tesla. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft. Heck, Tom Cruise risks his life every time he makes a Mission Impossible movie. All of those risks required legendary levels of fearlessness. So what does it take to become fearless in business? An even larger question, what does it take to become a fearless leader? My guest this week is Brendan Keegan, founder of Be Fearless and CEO of Merchants Fleet. But he's also a 6-time award-winning CEO who has built a system to overpower his own fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and achieved astronomical success across multiple industries. Brendan, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here, Joe.
So, Brendan, for a lot of Americans like us, we have our first sort of interactions with leadership when we play sports. And you're no different. I understand that you discovered sort of leadership when you were in 3rd grade. Can you take me back to when your coach assigned you as like the captain and it was basically your first time as a leader?
You know, Joe, what's interesting about that is Coach Buchanan didn't really assign anybody. He just said, hey, you know, we're in a circle getting ready to do jumping jacks. And he said, somebody get in the middle, and don't know what possessed me, but I jumped in the middle and off went my leadership journey from there.
It's funny the things we remember, like, you know, when you have conversations with your parents, you'll be like, remember that thing? And you're like, no, I don't remember. But you remember leading jumping jacks in the 3rd grade. Why do you think that had such an impact on you?
The thing about it is I enjoyed it. And then, you know, we did our little calisthenics, and then it was, you know, go do a lap, you know, as pretty much you do in any youth sport. And, you know, we did the lap, you know, being, you know, probably a kid trying to overachieve in 3rd grade. I finished early, and then I caught myself running back to the back of the pack and helping the kids that were struggling to do that opening lap and cheering them on. And, you know, it was like a little adrenaline rush, like, hey, wait, I'm helping this person be better. I'm a fan of this person. I'm leading. And, you know, if you had said at that moment, hey, Brendan, you a leader? I would have said, no, I'm just leading jumping jacks.
And you were in 3rd grade. You probably said, what's a leader?
Yeah. And you know, what's crazy, and I think for me, where I got the bug was there were little things like making sure that after practice, the cones and the footballs were put away. Like all of a sudden I felt like, wait, that's part of my responsibility. If I'm now leading the team, if I'm the captain, if I'm, you know, I got to make sure that, you know, it's an August day and we got double sessions. I got to make sure that we have enough water, you know. And if you ask me, like, well, where did that come from? Why did I feel like I had to pick up the cones after? I just think that's it just came not natural. It's just what I did. But I think the adrenaline I got from helping out and helping others is what just became, you know, my juice, my fuel, what I enjoyed. And, you know, I've kind of wound up making a career out of leading jumping jacks, I guess you could say.
Well, you stole my follow-up question, which was, you know, the nature versus nurture debate. Is this in your DNA, do you think? Or were you maybe even, I know 3rd grade's even way back, but was maybe like there's parents or family members involved that, or maybe just watching TV or reading books. Do you know where that came from? Do you ever look back and be like, where did this come from?
When I look back and think about it, I just think it's innate in everybody. Everyone's got the ability. It's, do you take advantage of it? And, you know, sometimes I talk about taking advantage of moments. And, you know, I know at one point in my career, when I was young in my career, I started wondering, you know, why is Charlie the VP and why isn't Sue? I think Sue is smarter. She's more articulate. And then I'd look at other people, and I started really thinking about, like, how did some people get there? And what I realized is every one of us has moments to seize when we're informally asked to lead, or we just have the opportunity to ask questions in a meeting, to throw out ideas in a meeting. And I think a lot of people that become leaders are ones that in those moments find a little bit of courage to just speak up. Matter of fact, I was talking to someone the other day, and they had their parent. They have kids in youth sports, and they were talking about getting uniforms for the team. And I said, hey, just be careful, because if you go to the board and you talk about uniforms, next thing you know, you're going to wind up on the board on the uniform committee. And I say that in that, when you volunteer for something, when you speak up and say, I have an idea, you're really putting your voice out there to be the next leader.
So then you're a leader. It's part of your DNA. How do you become a better leader at that point? Is it just trial and error? Do you read up? Do you have mentors? Because I'm always curious about sort of this trajectory of like discovering that you are a leader, you have the skills, but then you don't top out there. It's not like the using another sports metaphor, like you didn't peak in high school when you were the captain of the football team and then nothing else happened the rest of your life. So how did you improve your leadership?
Yeah, the first thing I say about leadership is it's a journey. There is no destination. Now, interestingly enough, if you had asked me in high school or college, I probably would have said it is a destination. Someday I want to be a CEO. And I thought, at that point, I probably thought, hey, geez, once you're CEO, you're that's the Mount Everest. You're at the top. And what I'll tell you is, having achieved that, there is no top. There is no top of the mountain. There is no destination. It's a constant journey, because as you're leading, whenever you are leading something bigger, so if you're a manager in a company and you get promoted to a director, all of a sudden you have all these skills and attributes that made you successful as a manager that you have to grow as a director. And there's knowledge you have to gain as a director because it's over a bigger team. So what I always say is leadership is this never-ending journey. It's not a destination. But what I will say is, if somebody feels it's a destination, they reach a point and they say, hey, I've got it. I know everything I need to know. Then what I will tell you is that is their peak. That is probably their best day, because every day going forward will probably be a decline, because you constantly have to be getting better. You constantly have to be understanding how people change, how the workforce changes, how the world changes. And, and we've seen that over the last 5 or 6 years, with DEI, with diversity, with COVID. You've really had to kind of push yourself to be a better leader. And if you really just said, nope, I figured it out, I don't need to change, then your best days are behind you.
And I'm a big fan of oversimplification, which is, as a CEO, is probably not the best thing. But I always put CEOs in two buckets. One, it's the innovative CEO who looks at the big picture, and then the CEO who's the manager. I like to call the Johnny Bravo from Brady Bunch, the guy who fits the suit. Where do you fall in that line? Maybe you disagree with that, but where do you fall in line in terms of like your CEO-ship? Like, are you the innovative guy? Are you the manager type? How would you describe your leadership skills these days?
Yeah, well, I think any CEO of any organization, small, medium, large, any size, 25% of your job is to lead the vision and be out in front of the company. You really need to be thinking about, where are we going to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? What trends are impacting us? Like right now, we're starting to see inflation set in North America. We're starting to see rising interest rates. During COVID, we saw more people shopping online. Well, just those three things are dramatically different and can impact all sorts of business differently. When COVID hit, some businesses declined, some took off. By the way, some that took off, it wasn't natural they took off. They had a leadership team, they had a CEO, they had a head of sales that really looked at, well, how do we change our value proposition? How do we provide more home delivery? What are things we can do? So I put myself in the innovative category. And I think if you want to have a growing company, I really think you do need a CEO that doesn't view themselves as a manager, that views themselves as being out front, being innovative, and thinking at new ways to do things in the future.
Those cheesy job interview questions that people ask, they're like, what's your best quality and what's your weakness? And my weakness, I know it's sort of like a goofy one, but I always say I'm horrible at delegating. Like I feel like I need to do everything. I don't trust anyone, and probably it's not the best attitude to have, but it's just really, I guess I'm like this immigrant's kid where you got to just do everything yourself. What's Brendan Keegan's weakness? What's something that you've had to work on, something that's sort of been in the back of your mind where you've always had to constantly be aware of the problem?
Yeah, so my biggest decision that I have to guard against myself and my weaknesses every day is gas or brake. A lot of times as, kind of a growth-oriented CEO, as somebody who's enjoys disrupting an industry, I want to keep both my feet on the gas pedal 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And what you got to be careful is the organization can't keep up with that. You need to create a cadence where, it's gas and brake, it's gas and brake. And, when is it 2 feet on the gas pedal? And by the way, when are you tapping the brakes or when are you really hitting the brakes? And I would tell you that, my weakness, and I say this, that I know it's a weakness because it's on my mind daily is, hey, you hit a situation, hey, do I need to tap the brakes? And because a lot of my natural inclination is, let's muscle through this, let's grow faster. And you got to realize that isn't healthy for an organization if you're constantly on the gas. Sort of like an F1 car, if all you do is stay on the gas, you're actually not going to finish the race.
And you internalize it. Do you have external levers, like folks around you, like your inner circle, they're like, yo, Brennan, slow your roll?
I absolutely have a few people in the organization, and not necessarily all that report to me, where I'll drop in and I'll just point blank ask them. I go, hey, how are we doing? Do we need to slow down? Do we need to pick up? And sometimes they'll just look at me and they'll say, hey, the team's fatigued. The team's fatigued. The team needs a break. Other times they'll be like, nope, this is our moment. Let's step. Like when COVID broke out, we viewed that because a lot of people in our industry tapped the brakes. We viewed that as a time to put both feet on the gas pedal because it was an incredible opportunity to grow. And we also had an employee base that really that were raising their hands to say, what can we do to help? We want to get through this pandemic. So I do have people, some of them report to me and they're on the leadership team. Other people are just people that are valued voices around the company that I think have high EQ. They are in tune with the pulse of the company. And I ask them. And one last thing that I do is, and it's something I've always done, and it's interesting when we get new employees to the company and they seem surprised. Every day, I walk around every row of the company, every cube of the company, every office of the company, 2 to 3 times a day. And, for me, it's not it's 11 o'clock, I've got to do it. It's just something I've just naturally done. And if you do that and you do it consistently, you can actually pick up the vibe of your organization. You can pick up a vibe that people are happy. You can pick up a vibe people are tired. You can pick up a vibe that they're concerned, that like right after COVID broke out, I picked up, we have a really concerned, what does this mean? Is our company going to make it through it? Team. And it's something I think that if you try to stay in tune with your company, that helps. But as a CEO, you always are a little removed, no matter how much you think you aren't. You do need people in the organization that are going to be authentic and transparent with you and tell you the truth at how are people feeling.
And you've been running companies for upwards of 20 years, and you've got an impressive resume. And I was looking back, and I was like, so is Brendan the kind of guy who comes into a company, fixes it up, and then leaves? Or is he the guy who fixes it up and stays? Because there is that, Brendan, this leader as well, who's like, I like to get my hands dirty, fix a problem, and then, do like an old Western movie and, ride my horse off into the sunset. I don't know if that's been your kind of track record, or is that something you've sort of relished? But talk to me about that kind of perception that I get from some leaders.
Sure. So in my career, I've been a CEO of, this is my 6th company, and, each has been different. My first one was a venture capital backed company where the plan was to grow it for 5 years. And then, as many venture backed companies are, was then to monetize it and sell. So that first one, was going in, growing it to a stage at where it would actually be healthier for that to get absorbed by a larger company that could do more with it. And we did that. Now, my next couple of companies were actual turnarounds, and those were post-internet bubble bursting, and one was post-recession, 2008, 2009, where 2 companies just got in dramatic trouble. They got in fiscal trouble, they got in strategic trouble, and those were private equity owned. And those assignments were, hey, can you fix these? Can you get them stabilized? Can you get them growing? And then we do want to sell these as a private equity firm. A lot of times they're looking at a 7-year horizon, and they were coming up on 7 years. And I had, in one case, 2 years, and in one case, 3 years to sell that. So those were the charter was. Now, when I'm here at Merchants Fleet, we don't have that charter. It's a family-owned business. It was to come in and grow it. And, we've grown it over the last 4.5 years from 500 million in its 55th year. And now we're in our 60th year this year to 2.5 billion. And we aren't looking to, so there wasn't any fixing.
Right.
What I would say is this was more transformation. How do you take a company that's been experiencing 2 to 3% growth and have it experience 40 to 50% growth? And we plan on doing that for the next 5 years, as long as they'll have me.
I don't know if you remember that 80s commercial with Cy Sperling for the Hair Club for Men. I'm not only the Hair Club's president, I'm also a client. And you sort of have this strange trajectory as well. Not to say that you needed any hair plugs or anything like that, but the fact that you were a client of Merchants Fleet, correct?
I was a client, then I was a board member, and then I made too many suggestions during board meetings, and now I'm running it.
Which is, Brandon, just so you know, that's not very common. I mean, outside of like Elon Musk trying to take over Twitter, to where someone just is like all of a sudden like, yeah, I kind of like this. I'm going to work around with it. I'm going to join the board. Then I'm going to run the company. How did you kind of like, I don't know, just put that all together?
What I'd say is it's an incredibly unique situation. I don't think many people, when they're running a company, can say, hey, I'm formally the largest client, I'm formally a board member. But what I will tell you is it was an incredible advantage for me coming in. Because when I came in and we reorganized the company, we did a big reorg right when I started, and I organized it around the client. Because as I got to know the company, I realized that I was only doing business with about a third of the company. There were 2/3 of the company that I was never introduced to, but yet I probably could have used their services. And just by the way the company was organized, it just wasn't easy for them to call on me. And we can say, hey, that's strange, but this is true in so many industries. So when we reorganized it, I really organized it saying, we want all of our services, we want everything we do to go through one person to the client, and we want them to represent absolutely everything the company can do. And that was a big change for the company. I never would have been able to make that change if I had come from the fleet industry. I never would have made that change if I came from another industry. I think the only reason I could really see that change is because I looked at it through the eyes of an actual client and said, man, this company could have been doing 3 times the business with me had they been coming at me from a different organizational structure. So yeah, very unique, but a really big advantage.
And give a quick plug here for Merchants Fleet. Folks not familiar with it, can you just give us a quick elevator pitch and what the company's mission is?
Sure. So our vision is to enable the movement of people, goods, and services freely and responsibly. So we're a commercial fleet company. So when you're driving down the highway later today, or you're driving down the highway right now listening to this podcast, and you look out your window, 1 out of 5 vehicles on the road are actually commercial fleet. So you'll see the obvious ones, the FedExes, the postal services. You'll see, you see a ton of those Amazon trucks. But you'll also see, Joe and Sons HVAC, and you'll see a painting company, and you'll see, edible arrangements, and you'll see all sorts of things. So 1 out of 5 of those vehicles going down the road is a commercial fleet. That's what we do. We provide leasing, fleet services, and technology for all commercial fleets, and we're the 5th largest in North America and absolutely the fastest growing.
That's awesome. And a friend of mine has been working in supply chain for decades. And he goes, no, when I mention supply chain at parties, people kind of glaze over and sort of ignore them at parties. And over the last couple years, all of a sudden, people are really interested in supply chain. Have you noticed even the term supply chain? I think even before the pandemic, no one even knew what that meant outside of people in the industry. How crazy is it that supply chain has become such a hot button phrase? Everyone knows about it. It affects everyone's life. Yet for many years, we took it for granted.
Yeah, well, so supply chain actually started with, we have a chip problem. We have a microchip problem about 2 years ago. And then it morphed into, it's not just a chip issue, it's a supply chain. I took a vacation. I actually tried surfing out on the West Coast, somewhat unsuccessfully. But when I was out there, if you looked all down Long Beach, what you saw were ships anchored. And they were anchored because they couldn't get into the ports. The ports didn't have enough workers. And so all these supply chain goods were sitting there. So the supply and demand was off. But, it started with chips, and we started looking at cars. And anyone who's right now gone out, let's say you're going out to buy a new car, 3 years ago, you were going in and they were saying, we'll give you $6,000 off, we'll give you 1.9% financing. And now they're telling you, hey, you can buy it at sticker and we've only got one. And if you don't get it today, we might not have it tomorrow. And here's an interesting stat I got from one of our bank group members. So that supply chain is starting to result in inflation. Because if there's less goods, then the prices are good. I mean, supply and demand, this is economics 101, then the goods will start to go up. We also have a labor shortage in our country. Unemployment's, I believe, at 3.6%. But the average American family this year, due to inflation, will pay $5,200 more for the same goods they bought in 2021.
Wow. And now all of a sudden people have a piqued interest in this, Brendan. So when you bring up what you do for a living, the fact that you run this incredible fleet, do you find yourself like becoming the life of the party now?
No, I find the life of the party is usually whoever brings the best wine. So I don't think me bringing supply chain stories makes me life of the party. Maybe it makes my conversation more interesting than it was a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, I maybe got asked, hey, can you get me a good deal? And now it's, how come when I went to get my car, it was so expensive? And I even get asked, I have no idea how, I even get asked now, Brendan, why is gas $5? And, and I sit there and go, well, there's this little thing going on over in Russia and Ukraine you might have heard of.
It's funny. You sort of alluded to the Great Resignation. And my take on this, Brendan, I don't know if you agree with this. During the pandemic, people became allergic to jerks. And they felt like once they got back to work, they're like, I don't want to work with jerks anymore, whether it's a jerky boss or whether it's, whether you're working in retail or working in hospitality where you have to deal with jerks on basically a minute-by-minute basis. So what do we do now? How do we solve this problem? Because as you mentioned, the unemployment rate's low, yet you walk by a store, restaurant, everyone's hiring. Everyone has thousands of jobs available. Is this just the new normal, to borrow a phrase that came up a lot during the pandemic? Is this how things are going to be now for the foreseeable future?
So you bring up one of the things I least like to talk about, and that's the Great Resignation. Because Joe, what I like to talk about is the Great Retention. Okay, so every minute as leaders that we focus on the Great Resignation, we're focused on talking about our people leaving us. And I can tell you this, that's wasted energy. I think you have to focus on the Great Retention and put every ounce of your energy into what are you going to do to engage your employees, to develop your employees, to attract new employees such that you don't experience the Great Resignation, and put all of your energies into the Great Retention. And I can tell you the companies that focus on the Great Retention, they won't experience the Great Resignation. Now, coming to work, yes, work has changed. There are people that used to be happy coming into an office 5 days a week, and now their preference is hybrid. And if their existing employer were to demand that they came in 5 days a week, they might leave. But that's where if you're focused on retention, you're sitting there saying, we have employees that maybe don't want to come in 5 days anymore. Can we create an ongoing hybrid environment for them and not necessarily go back to everything has to be the way it was pre-pandemic? And that really comes to, flexibility and what are the needs of an evolving workforce. And I think COVID evolved the workforce, and I'm going to make this up, a decade's worth over 2 years.
Yeah.
What you would typically see, evolution over a decade, we probably have seen over 2 years. Just like more people, e-commerce went from 11% of goods in the U.S. sold pre-pandemic to 14% post-pandemic. So yes, we saw above average growth. But people now aren't going to say, I really like during the pandemic getting my water shipped to my house. I don't have to get it at the grocery store anymore. I don't think people are going to say, nope, I'm really interested in going back to the grocery store and lugging it around and putting it underneath the carriage. So that's where, we all have to think about, when it comes to the Great Resignation, put your energy into what are you doing to engage the workforce of 2022 so you don't experience it. And if anything, you become a magnet for people that are leaving other organizations that are looking for, let's call it, the new normal.
Brendan, when I was interviewing a bunch of CEOs and leaders during the height of the pandemic and everyone was forced to work remote virtually, the recurring theme I got from these leaders, which is very funny now, but they're like, man, I didn't think we would do so well as a remote work. I'm really surprised that that all my employees were responsible and did everything they were supposed to. And every time they would say it, I'm like, really? So you're saying you never trusted your employees? Because that's basically what what you're saying is like, I don't trust my employees unless I get to pop in their office every 5 minutes. Do you feel like those kind of leaders are now waking up to the fact that, hey, listen, I don't have to be looking over my employee's shoulder anymore. Now, if I hire the right people, I don't have to worry about the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the keys is hiring the right people and having them have the right tools. So if someone's going to work remote and they're going to work fully remote, they're going to work remote 2 days a week, 3 days a week, do they have the proper computing technology? I know we worked at getting people monitors at home because, let's say they were a graphic designer. Let's say they were on a help desk where they had 2 screens in the office, and all of a sudden you send them home with a laptop. They go from 2 30-inch screens to one 13-inch screen. So it's not just, are they going to log in and are they going to do the work? Do they have the tools to be productive? And so, as leaders, our job is to create an environment in which everyone can succeed. And the environment is cultural. The environment is the right benefits. The environment is managers that are leaders. The environment is trust and empathy. But the environment is also, in the office, they had a keyboard and mouse. They go home and they've got their laptop. Do they need a keyboard and mouse? Are they more comfortable with that? By the way, do they even have the right desk? Are you finding out that, geez, someone's been hunched over for a year because they've been sitting on their sofa as opposed to having a desk? So I think as leaders, as we embrace the hybrid environment, we really need to say we need to make their environment at home successful for them to succeed long term. Again, whether that's a desk, a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, headphones, or a really cool microphone like the one I'm using now, Joe.
Well, speaking of microphone, a big part of your brand is fearless. And so my question is that because you're a huge fan of Taylor Swift's album from 2008, Fearless? Where did Fearless come into play with everything you're doing these days?
I don't. It came into play a long, long time ago, and came
before Taylor Swift is what you're saying.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the only music I listen to is on Sirius is BPM, beats per minute, because it's got no words, so I'm not a music guy.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, my son's name is Patrick, and when he was young, I told him it was Brendan Patrick's music station. And don't ever tell your kid that, because he came home one day and said, "Dad, you lied to me. We don't own a music station." My friend said it's beats per minute. So a little aside there. So I'm not a music guy.
Okay.
So I don't know about that. But it was interesting. I had done my second turnaround, and one of my mentors had said, "Brendan, you're really fearless." I go, "What do you mean?" They go, "Well, you go into these companies that are on fire," and they equated what I did to being a fireman. You're running into a company that's burning down, and you're going to go in and extinguish it and rebuild it. And I said, yeah, but that's just what I do. And they're like, nah, a lot of people wouldn't do that. And that's kind of when, outside people started helping me see what my greater skill set was. Because at that point, if you had said, Brendan, what's your skill set? I would have said, I think I'm a good communicator. I think I'm a good leader. I think I have good energy. And I think what some of my mentors said, Brendan, you're really good at fixing things. And as you fix things, what you're good at is you're good at taking fear, uncertainty, and doubt away from people and instilling them with confidence. And I started going through that and going, interesting, that's not how I see myself. And that's the value of a mentor. So if anyone's out there listening and you don't have a mentor, get a mentor, because I can tell you this, they probably see your skills different than you see yours. You're looking at your tangible skills. You're looking at, I'm a good communicator. I'm good at PowerPoint. I'm good at finance. Your mentors are going to see what your macro skills are. They're going to see what some of the bigger gifts that God bestowed on you. And I think it was my mentors that really said, Brendan, your real skill set is instilling confidence in people so that anything is possible. And I think from there, the brand, Be Fearless kind of came out. And as I embraced it, I found how many times, and by the way, during the pandemic, it was my full-time job was to remove fear, uncertainty, and doubt on a weekly basis from our employees. And we did virtual hangouts every week. And if you had asked me pre-COVID, hey, are you going to do a virtual Zoom with your team every week? I would have said, no, why? Why would I do an hour Zoom meeting with them every week? They don't want to hear from me that often. What I found during COVID, they absolutely, and I can tell by our participation levels, wanted to meet every Friday at 4:00, usually with a cocktail in their hand, and talk about what's going on. What's going on at the company? What's going on in the world? And I viewed a big part of my job was to make people feel comfortable, remove their uncertainty, and let them know that we were going to get through this. By the way, even when I didn't have answers, and I'll give you an example. We sent them home March 17th, 2020, dressed as a leprechaun, by the way, because it was St. Patrick's Day.
Obviously.
And sent them home for 2 weeks. We said, hey, we think this is going to last 2 weeks. You'll be back, but we'll let you know. So a little wrong on that. But, by the way, at the end of 1 week, we said, hey, we're going to extend it another week. And at the end of 2 weeks, we said, we're going to extend it a month. And I think that constant communication, but at that time, they didn't need monthly meetings. They needed weekly meetings. And I think that's kind of staying in tune to what I said earlier with the vibe of your organization.
And I feel like there's a fine line to that, right, Brendan? Because a little fear is good. Like, we all need fear. It's sort of this response that since the cavemen had of like, you need to be afraid of like a bear eating you or something like that. You have to have a little fear. So how do you toe that line of fearless and just having a wee bit of fear that prevents you from doing something either silly or wrong?
Fear, as you mentioned, is a motivator. Now, we need to channel fear as a motivator and not let it be debilitating. So one of my favorite examples is when the Patriots were down 28-3 to the Atlanta Falcons.
Wait, hold on a second. You're bringing up a Patriots game?
I am. I'll, if you want, I'll go another route. I'll bring up the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, but if the team had let fear overtake them, then they wouldn't have been able to do what they did. Now, what they also needed to do, though, is they needed to recognize, guys, we only have a quarter and a half. We only have 18 minutes to pull this off. So a certain amount of fear of the next play is the most important play of the game was the mentality that they took. So fear can be a motivator, but as a leader, your job is to channel the positive side of fear and to stop the unhealthy side of fear. The unhealthy side of fear is, well, even if we do good on the next play, it's not going to matter. There's no one who's ever come back from this big a deficit. So you've got to allow the next play is the biggest play, but then you've got to take, in this case, the negative talk away.
They also needed the Falcons to choke and Julian Edelman to make an ungodly catch. There was a lot of other things involved there too, as well, Brendan.
Well, a holding call and Matt Ryan getting sacked when they were in field goal range also helped.
Yeah. Well, this coming from a Jets fan, as you could probably tell, Brendan, from my tone. But before we go, Brendan, I want to ask you, you have a quote up in your office that I'd love for you to share. It's have the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. Why is that hanging up in your office, and why is that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that I've got it in my office, my car, my house. It's everywhere. I think as for me personally, but for people I interact with, you have to create an environment where failure is okay. Anyone who's done anything great, whether it's creating electricity or creating the next electric vehicle, if you said failure's not an option and we can't fail, we can't allow any failure, you're actually going to hold people back from greatness. Now, you have to say, hey, have the courage to fail. Have the courage to do something that hasn't been done. Have the courage to do it differently, but then have the faith that you're going to succeed. And what the faith to succeed means, it may not be your first time, your first shot that gets it right. It might be your 10th. It might be your 20th. It might be your 30th. But if you don't try and if you don't push yourself, you're going to never achieve greatness. So if somebody says, hey, I've never failed, I've never made a mistake, then I'd say they probably haven't achieved greatness because they haven't pushed themselves beyond what their natural limit is. And, going back to, fearless leadership, going back to what is leadership, going back to how do you create an environment, you have to create an environment where failure's okay and you learn from it. And I can tell you personally, I've probably learned as much or more from some of my failures as I have some of my successes. But what you've then got to say, but no matter what, we are going to win. Again, using that Page example, they never doubted. They always had the faith that they were going to succeed, but they did have to do some things that said, hey, this could fail, but we're going to have the courage that this is the right call and it's not going to fail.
His name is Brendan Keegan. He is the CEO of Merchants Fleet. Brendan, thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we turn things around between this New York-New England relationship, because I think New England's had a pretty good 20, 30-year run. You probably agree it's time for the Jets to take over and run the AFC East for the foreseeable future, correct? You agree with that?
What I'd say is we're probably more on par, but there's a team up in Buffalo, yes, I think that we both have to be fearful of.
Yeah, very much so. Brendan, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, Joe. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's it for this episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoy the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.